To start with,
Sure.
page 78, 79. Okay, I want to read just a few psukim. Let's read a few verses together, and then we'll try to make some sense of this. I'll do the Hebrew and the English. Vaeira1 Hashem, Elohim Mamre. And Hashem appears in the fields of Mamre, and he was sitting at the entrance to the tent in the heat of the day. Vayisa. You want to read the next pasuk? Vayisa.
ויישא עיניו וירא והנה שלושה אנשים ניצבים עליו וירא וירוס לרעתם מפתח האוהל וישתחו ארצה.
Okay, so again, the first pasuk, God appears to him in the fields of Mamre, and he's sitting. Avram is sitting at the entrance of the tent at the heat of the day. Two interesting points I want to mention. It said God appeared to him. Who's him? Who's him?
Abraham.
How do you know? No, I've never written a novel, but I know that I would never start my own novel with the words "and he explained." Right? You would never start some fresh story with a pronoun. You need to first introduce your character, and then you can say he, she, whatever the case is. It says, and God appeared to him. Who's him? There's no clarification. All right. V'hu Yoshe Pesachol. He's sitting at the entrance of the tent. Kichom hayom. Kichom is like, the letter chaf means like the heat of the day. Right? It's kind of, what does that mean? Then it says he lifted up his eyes. Next verse. Why don't we read it in English first? The next verse in English? What do we read in English?
Who, me?
Yeah. Two. He lifted his eyes.
He lifted his eyes and saw, and behold, 3 men were standing over him. He perceived, so he ran toward them from the entrance of the tent and bowed toward the ground.
Okay. He lifted his eyes and saw, and behold, all right? And there were 3 men standing over him. Interesting expression, standing over him. And then he perceived. What does that mean? So he ran toward them from the entrance of the tent, and he bowed toward the ground. Let's go one more verse. Next passage. Want to do the Hebrew or the English? What would you rather do?
I'll do the Hebrew.
Okay. What is your name? I'm sorry.
Lisa.
Lisa. Okay.
Vayomer Adonai imna matzati chen beinecha al na ta'avor me'al abdecha.
Terrific. Want to translate for us, somebody? Who's next? Want to read? Want to translate? Yeah.
And he said, my Lord, if I find favor in your eyes, please pass not away from your servant.
Okay. So, these are the first 3 pasuk I want to get to. Now, in the third pasuk, Vayomer he says, and then he says, now you pronounce it as God's name, my Lord, and that's what the English has it. But we'll see Rashi tells us this word can actually not refer to God, but he's referring to he's actually addressing the 3 men that had come to visit him, and he's speaking to the elder of the 3, and he's saying, listen, please don't leave here. Right? Because let me help you out first, all right? So either he's talking to God or he's talking to them. And the truth is, the reason why Rashi offers both explanations, because it doesn't lend itself to an obvious explanation. Rashi tells us, well, it could refer, on the one hand, refer to God, or it could refer to, he's addressing the people themselves. And the question is, why does the Torah write something that we're unclear who he's talking to? Why would the Torah do that? Let's be clear who Avram was talking to. Why tell us, well, we're not sure. He's either talking to God, and he's saying, God, please wait here, or he's telling them, and just the elder one, please wait here. So, if he's talking to God, then we have another problem, which is he's actually telling God, hang out here, please. I'm putting you on hold. I got to deal with these people first. The sages tell us from here we see Gedolach Nazorchim, it's far better to invite people into your home. Hachnazorchim is far greater than even receiving God's presence. And that itself becomes a bit problematic, because one would think that, it's kind of like the purpose of a mitzvah is to connect to God, right? Well, if I'm already talking to God, I'm obviously connected with Him. So why would I run to do another mitzvah if I'm actually connecting to God? It's kind of like if you'd be standing in the Oval Office, about to talk to the president, and somebody texts you, hey, by the way, I have a great way for you to get to meet the president. I'm right here with him in the Oval Office, right? So Avram is in the Oval Office of God right now. He's talking, God's come to pay a visit him. And also we say, oh, you know what? ditch that. Let me do a mitzvah so I can connect to God. You already connected to God. You speak to right here. So how do you understand the concept that hospitality might be greater than the actual act of receiving God's presence? So let's try to kind of put this all in a package. Okay, so first Rashi tells us that when God appeared to Abraham, the nature of the visit was to visit the sick. That Abraham was sick, and God was making an appearance to visit the sick. All right, and visiting is a mitzvah, as we know, and it's certainly under the general category of chesed, of kindness, but there's a very specific category called visiting the sick. And I want to talk about why it gets its own special category. Why is it not just simply a general category of kindness? But I want to take a step back also. Every act of kindness, so here we're seeing, we're seeing an act of kindness where we're seeing an act of kindness where God's visiting Abraham. We're seeing an act of kindness where Abraham is helping the guests, and a very specific act of kindness called hospitality. So I want to talk about various acts of kindness that we see over here. And by the way, this story, we know Abraham is the paradigm for kindness, and for some reason this story is the story that the Torah chose to model acts of kindness. So I want to talk about why that's the case. It's interesting. Maimonides, when he talks about, we know Maimonides did a brilliant, his magnum opus was the Mishnah Torah, where he excerpted all the laws of the Talmud, or actually he pulled out the laws, the bottom line. The Talmud has back and forth, and the Rambam extracted the bottom line halacha, and he codified them and categorized them in the Mishnah Torah. In one section of the Mishnah Torah, Maimonides talks about how all acts of kindness, whether it's charity or visiting the sick, are based on the following verse: "V'ahavta l'reacha kamocha." You should love your fellows, you love yourself. Makes perfect sense, right? I would want somebody to help me, so I should help them. Makes sense. Yet in another section, Maimonides says something else. Maimonides says many of these acts of kindness, mitzvot, that we just described, are based on a different verse called "V'halachta b'drachav." You should emulate God's ways and follow in His footsteps. Also makes sense. It says Mahu Racham, God's compassionate. We should be compassionate. God's this, right? So they both make sense, but we don't need two sources for the same halacha, because if we do, that means one is extra. If they both teach you the exact same thing, I don't need two, and there's nothing in the Torah that's extra. So if Maimonides saw the need for two sources, it must mean that each source is teaching something different. If it was teaching the exact same thing, one is superfluous. So the question is, what is the difference? There's a medrash that tells us that, I don't recall exact words, that God told Eov, you're pretty good with your acts of kindness, but you see, if somebody needs barley, you give him barley. If somebody needs wheat, you give him wheat. If somebody needs wine, you give him wine. This is an obvious Reb Nosson. This is a medrash obvious Reb Nosson. Abraham, on the other hand, if somebody needs barley, he gives him wheat. If somebody needs wheat, he gives him wine. That was, he grades him up, right? Gives him an upgrade. So was he just saying that quantitatively or even qualitatively, Abraham did more, like you gave him barley? Is that the whole difference, that he offered a higher course menu? That's not what he's saying. What he's saying is the following. There are two ways that we can do an act of kindness. Somebody has a need and you fill their need. That's an act of kindness. All right? It's an act of kindness. So you're walking down the street and somebody's waiting by the corner and asking for money. You feel bad for that person. You feel a little pain even for that person, and you react to that pain and you give them. All right? So that's really based on the idea that the person has a need and I satisfy the need. That's what Eob did. You need barley, I give you barley. You need wheat, I'm satisfying your need. Abraham went much more than that. It wasn't about satisfying need. Abraham said, I want to be a giver. I want to give. I'm not just satisfying a need. I understand the opportunity here to be able to give. So Abraham gave more than the need because he wanted to really be a giver here. The difference between the two sources are exactly that. The Haftareh Kamocha is based on the fact that, you have a need, and if I had that same need, I want you to fulfill it, so I'll do that for you. That's one source, and that's one kind of kindness. V'alachta b'drachav, it is not based on that. God has no needs. So we can't say, God says, if I had that need, I want that done for myself. That's not that at all. V'alachta b'drachav means God has no needs whatsoever, but God, in a very proactive way, seeks out ways to do acts of kindness. That the whole world was created as an act of kindness. There was no needs at all because there was no people at that time, but God wanted to be a giver. So the two sources really reflect the two kinds of activity of kindness you can do. It can be based on, I feel the need that you feel, right? And I know if I would want somebody to treat me that way, so I'll do the same thing for you. And that's one level, but it's a whole entirely different level where it's not just about I'm fulfilling a need, I'm actually emulating God's ways to be a giver. And we might even add that the first thing is based on an external stimuli, which is I'm walking the street and something jarring hits me. I see somebody hungry and I feel that pain and I react to that pain. The second has nothing with external stimuli. I don't even see anything on the street. I just know I need to go out there and be helping people. There was no external stimuli. Abraham over here really was excused. It was kechom hayom, and Rashi tells us it wasn't quite the heat of the day, but Hashem turned up the thermostat, so to speak, even though it wasn't supposed to be quite that way. He turned the thermostat by taking the shield from the sun, and now Abraham is going to do acts of kindness. And why he do that? Because Abraham was troubled that there's nobody for me to help. And the obvious question is, why are you troubled? There's nobody to help. You're off the hook. But it wasn't about fulfilling somebody, satisfying his need. Because Abraham wanted to have the opportunity to give. And it's interesting enough, and I don't think it's a coincidence, that the model of kindness is specifically this instance where there were angels. So angels, in fact, they don't even need that. The food that Abraham gave him, they didn't even need that food. At the end of the day, he's doing all these lavish meals, they didn't even need it. And that becomes the model for kindness, because exactly that. It has nothing to do with the recipient. Here we're focusing on the act of giving. So even if the recipients were angels who didn't really, in the end of the day, need it, but God wanted to teach us through this Torah, through this story, how important it is to be a giver, regardless of the recipient, which is b'halach b'dracha, to emulate God's ways. Okay? So that's step number one. And the nature of the visit, we said, was God was visiting the sick. So, I want to ask you a question. First of all, how did Rashi know this? How did Rashi know that the nature of the visit was to visit the sick? Could have been a bunch of reasons, yeah.
It starts Vayira Elav Hashem.
Right.
The and it's connected to what came right before.
Well, I don't know how else you'd write that. I think you're right, but for not the right reason. The reason why Rashi understood that, there's two reasons I'm going to share with you. One is more grammatical area, and one is more philosophical, and they're both very important. I asked you the question earlier, which is, God appeared to him, who's him? Obviously, the Torah is writing him, and not who it was. It's because the Torah is saying, it's obvious, I'm talking about the person we just talked about. So you turn to page 4, it's talking about Abraham. And the Torah wants you to connect the dots. Why is the Torah doing that for us? The Torah is saying, hey, there's a connection here. The purpose of the visit was because Abraham was sick from the circumcision. So the Torah specifically said, Elov, him, and not who it was, because the Torah wants us to work our brain and say, hey, who is this him? Right? Who is the him? It must be Abraham. Well, why didn't you just tell me? Oh, because I want me to make a connection between the stories. Oh, what's the connection? Abraham was sick. That's the visit. That's one way of learning Rashi. The Maharal, the brilliant philosopher of the Maharal, has a whole different approach. And it takes it to a different level. Somebody is sick. We're here in Potomac, Maryland, and somebody you know is sick living in Seattle, Washington. So, certainly, visiting sick implies you show up at the guy's house and visit him. What happens if you can't make that visit? You pick up the phone, and you talk to the person, and you try to cheer him up that way. Would that fulfill the mitzvah of visiting the sick? What do you say, guys? Yes, no, maybe?
I heard yes before.
You heard yes? Okay.
Yes.
Yes. Okay. I think where Moshe says no. I think so. And I don't think he supplies the reason why. Maybe he doesn't supply a reason. I don't recall that anymore, but I'd like to share with you a reason. All right? Now, don't be disappointed with me, because I'm not going to disagree with you that it is certainly an act of kindness. In the general sense, of course, pick up the phone, showing your care and concern, but it doesn't fulfill the fullest mitzvah of Bikur Cholim. Why? Why do you visit the sick? Well, a bunch of reasons. Why would you visit the sick? Lisa, right?
Yeah.
Why? Yeah? Why would you visit the sick?
You make them feel better
Yes.
by showing you care.
You show you care, you make it feel better.
Isn't the visit to the sick supposed to take away 1/60th of the illness?
Okay, that's sort of true. Okay, on a Kabbalist level, like, that's way past my pay grade, but okay, yes. Some say actually it's only true if you're It's called, you look like him, you have the same history as him, the same story as him. That's not always anybody, but okay, let's assume that's the case. What else? Why is when you visit the sick? You want to cheer him up. You want to find out what his needs are, right? You want to show that you care, right? All those things you can do by phone. I can cheer you up on the phone. I can find out what your needs are on the phone, right? There's one thing you can't do. You can't be there. And what does that mean? When a person is sick, aside from being sick, when they're laid up alone in bed, that feeling of loneliness, that feeling of being disconnected, that itself is disheartening, sometimes even depressing. You're out of the loop. Human beings need to be in the loop. We need to be connected. And when a person is kind of by himself, that itself, and that being detached, that adds to the sickness. It compounds where he's at. And today, unfortunately, we're losing really sight of how important that is, because we text each other. Okay. And why do we text each other? Because we want to avoid all possible contact. I want to make my point, shoot it to you, and I'm out of here, right? I don't even want to wait for you. Boom, I'm in and out. The whole idea of valuing just being together has been dismissed, and I might even if you do it virtually with, what do you call FaceTime. It's certainly valuable, and it's made better than, but it doesn't play, just when there's vibes that pass between people when you're sitting together. So one of the things about visiting the sick is just being there. Just sitting with that person feels, I'm making a connection with people. I have that human connection, that human interaction by being there. It's almost inconsequential what the conversation is. The conversation you might need for what your needs are, cheer you up, but being there, just being there by itself, helps the person. It's interesting. It says here, God appeared to Abraham in the fields of Mamre. Okay, and then what? Did he speak to him? There's no mention of any conversation. Right? It says Abraham saw the guest, and he runs to the guest. That's it. It says that God appeared to Abraham. Do we ever have a clue why he appeared to Abraham? We never know why. God appeared to Abraham.
Gives them a sense of normalcy.
What do you mean?
The presence of people, like going back to visit in the
hold on 1 second. But it says God appeared to Abraham, and why'd you appear? Says the morale. You know why the Torah doesn't mention why he appeared? Because that's irrelevant. The appearance itself was valuable. Now, 1 second. Why would somebody appear to somebody or be there if there's no point of communication? If it's to visit the sick, then it makes sense. The reason how Rashi understood that the nature of the visit was visit the sick is because it says God appears, but doesn't say what he said. Well, why would you appear and not say anything? Well, if you're visiting the sick, that itself is significant. Just being there makes a difference. So Rashi uses detective logic, so to speak, to understand that it must be the nature of the visit was visit the sick. Because why would God appear if he had nothing to say? Well, you know what? Sometimes visiting the sick, just being there makes a difference. All right? Make sense? Okay. So that is, hold on 1 second, that is the idea behind the mitzvah of visiting the sick, and why that's slightly different than the general act of kindness. And yes, of course, if you can't show up in Seattle, Washington, of course pick up the phone. It's a tremendous act of kindness. But that final level of visiting, which is your presence being there, is not quite the same. Now, you may not have a choice. You can't. But understand the value of being there. And if you can be there, if you can drive to the hospital rather than call them on the phone, being there is a totally different experience than being on the phone. And that's what the pasuk is telling us. And that's, I believe, the idea. Okay, so now let's...
Rabbi?
Yeah.
Wouldn't it be exactly the same analysis of making the Shiva call?
Yeah, I would say the same thing. I would say the Shiva call is the exact same thing. That being there, and we know that. We know some of the Shiva call, if the person who's sitting Shiva doesn't speak, you don't speak either, right? And yet, the Shiva call, just being there, I would agree with that. I really would. I think that, I haven't seen them, I'll say that, but I think there's something about that, obviously, as well. 100%. All right? Okay, so that's step number one. We talked acts of visiting the sick. I want to talk now a little bit about hospitality, and I want to talk about vis-a-vis what does that mean that hospitality might be even greater than, and then I want to move on to some other ideas as well. We'll try to get, this parsha just has so much going on, so we have to, okay. So, hospitality. Why is it that hospitality is even greater than having a divine presence? So some understand this in a very beautiful way. I'm going to say something simpler first. Hospitality, the whole idea of inviting someone to your home as a mitzvah kind of reminds you that we're all guests in this world. That none of us are really hosts. I'm kind of the idea of just always being involved with guests reminds us that we're all guests. And in a sense, when you're receiving God's presence, aren't you kind of like playing host? Right? So in a way, taking care of guests is a more valuable lesson because it reminds you that we're all guests in this world. And when you're hosting God's presence, then you kind of reinforce that you're a host. And we're supposed to really say that's not the case. We're not hosts in this world. We're all guests in this world. But let me take it on a deeper level. We've mentioned this many, many times, the concept that human beings may compose two parts, the body and the soul. Clear. If you had to tell me what is the defining behavioral trait of the body and the defining behavioral trait of the soul, one word for each.
Animal.
What?
Give
One
me.
is animalistic and one is...
Eating? No. Giving and taking.
Yeah, take it.
The essence of the body is a taker. The body just wants, give me, I want more pleasure. Take. The soul is a giver. The soul gives, that's the defining character of the soul. Okay. And if you're a taker, you're just developing a body. If you're a giver, you're actually exercising a soul. Okay, and there's much more to expand on this. I don't want to do this now. Having said that, in a sense, taking care of guests is an opportunity to be a giver. Hosting God's presence is receiving the pleasure of God coming and having this connection. Giving is always greater than receiving. So the opportunity to take guests is greater than receiving God's presence because one's an act of giving and one's an act of receiving. You want to say it a little simpler. When Abraham's receiving God's presence, it's almost like a reward. I'm getting God's presence. I'm taking. Reward you take. Giving is always a greater idea. So taking care of guests, therefore, is on the hierarchy is much greater because you have an opportunity to become a giver, and that's something greater. But let's come back to this idea that was he talking to God? Was he talking?
Not to interrupt, but almost like the idea that teaching Torah is a higher level than learning Torah or sharing Torah.
Okay, that's a very interesting idea. Yes, there's something to that. That's a very nice point. That's very nice. Okay, very, very good. Yeah, it's interesting in the Shema. I don't know why in the bracha, the previous Shema, we say thank you, God, give us the ability to lilmod, ulalame, to learn and to teach, and we'll see that they're both really important ideas, but certainly the opportunity to teach certainly is an opportunity to give as well, right? Okay, and that's why you say mitalmida yismakulam. I learned more from my students because the giving becomes part of the experience. Absolutely true. But I want to address now the question I asked earlier, which is, why so vague? Is he talking to God? Is he talking to the person? Right? And it's written in a way that kind of lends to both. So I want to share with you two ideas. They sound dissimilar, but really we're going to combine them. The first idea is that there's a lesson over here. Was Abraham speaking to God? Was Abraham speaking to the people? He's saying, God, please wait here, and he puts God on hold, so to speak. Or is he speaking to the people and saying, please wait here, I want to help you? Right? Which one is it? And the answer is both. In the sense that a human being is required to live in two worlds at once. A person has to be able to have a relationship with God, but at the same time, he can't ignore his responsibility as a human being. It's easy to be like lofty in the heavens and totally ignore, right? And sometimes a person is so into that spiritual world, he almost can't relate to the mundane needs of somebody else. Here, Abraham is speaking to God and saying to us, would you like mustard with that tongue, right? He gets into the real details, the nitty-gritty of, it's not just the act doing, that's what he says. He offers him chardel, he offers him mustard. He gets, because I care about your needs, even the most mundane needs. The ability for a person to be in the loftiest spheres, and yet to be on earth, and dealing with people, that's the ultimate. So Abraham was being in two worlds at once. He's talking to God, he's having this conversation with God, and at the same time, he's still able to maintain his presence of, I'm focusing on you, the individual, and your, what I might consider petty needs, but they might be your real needs. And that's a tremendous challenge, and it's kind of like the ladder that Jacob has, the dream that he has about the ladder. Mutzav arza, varosha megesh shemaima. The bottom of the ladder is on the ground, and the top of the ladder is in heaven. And some say that represents the human being. The human being has to have his feet on the ground, while at the same time, his head is in the clouds. Not to be both at the same time, and that's what Abraham is doing exactly here. He's living and talking to both. But I want to say it a little bit differently than that. It's not that he's having a simultaneous conversation, one with God and with the human being. I think it's deeper than that. We know that the first temple was destroyed because of, one of the reasons, because of Avodah Zarah. Idolatry. Okay, that makes sense. The temple is about service to God. You commit idolatry, what relationship do you have with God? The second temple was destroyed because of sin aschina. because of baseless hatred. Now, baseless hatred is not a good thing, but what does it have to do with the service to God? That's two separate items. One thing is I didn't do well bein adam l'chavero. My relationship with other people was lacking. But why should you take away from me the temple and where I'm serving God? And the answer is we're missing the point. And that is that the real idea is to recognize or to see God in every single person. The truth of the matter is that that's the real ideal, is to see God's presence in every single person. Sinas chinam, the idea of baseless hatred, if you would see God in that person, you wouldn't have hate for that person. So it really, the idea of violating a bein adam l'chavero, the idea of not recognizing the greatness of every person and the godliness of every single person, that itself is why the temple is being destroyed, because it is related to God. Because you're supposed to see the godliness of every single person, and it's a failure if you don't. So the reason why it's ambiguous, was he talking to God or was he talking to the person? The answer is both, because he's talking to God when he's talking to the person. When I'm talking to you, I'm seeing the godliness in you. That's the real challenge, to be able to see that in the person. Someone's asked the Baal Shem Tov, how can you love God? How do you do that? He said, by loving another person. Because you love that person, you're really learning how to embrace God, because you're seeing the God in that person. And so, who was he talking to? Why is he written so ambiguously? No, he's talking to the person, but seeing the God in the person. And that's really the ultimate challenge to do so. And that's what Abraham was able to do. Okay. So now he's going to invite these people into his home. And just one last thing about this, and then we'll move to the next section. Hospitality. Acts of hospitality. We know that in a way that Abraham used that as a method of kiruv, of outreach. Why don't you come to my home? And they schmoozed a little bit. They schmoozed up. He had a little kiddush and everything else, and then they talked about God, right? So why is Abraham known for his hospitality? Should he be known for his kiruv, for his outreach? Now, why is it, we talk about Abraham and his acts of kindness and hospitality. The hospitality was just a means for kiruv. So why do we kind of refer to Abraham's acts of hospitality? The hospitality was just a means to an end. In fact, if I wanted to be a little bit not so nice about it, so it wasn't a little bit kind of manipulative on his part. He'd come into my house for a freebie meal. Before you know it, he's wrapping tefillin on the guy, right? So maybe it's manipulative. He's kind of using hospitality to get to the person, right? So not only why we're not emphasizing the kiruv, but maybe it's kind of like a little bit not so direct and honest to use, right? To kind of use the hospitality as a way to get to the guy. So I want to share with you, and let me just mention the point that we don't understand really what Chanas Archim is. I think I asked you this once before, but I'm just doing it from the perspective. You have to fly into, I don't know, you have a business deal someplace in California, right? So you call your friend and say, listen, I got a business deal tomorrow morning, 9 a.m. Could I, I'm showing up, I'm taking a late flight. Do you mind if I go to your house? I'll sleep for a couple hours, and then have this business deal at 9 a.m. And the guy says, absolutely, I'd love to see you, but you know what? I'd like to do you a bigger favor, if you want. It's up to you. That guy is doing very well. You're going to schlep all the way from the LAX to my house, and after schlep 3, 4, 5 o'clock in the morning to get back for the meeting? I have a better idea. I'm going to pay for your hotel right near the airport, because that's where the meeting is anyway. And food, I'll send you right now kosher meals, the most delicious meals. All right? I'm not trying to brush you off. You want to come to my house, I'd love to have you. But I think just for your sake, why schlep you at 3 o'clock in the morning, get up 4 hours later, live like a king, a beautiful hotel, I'll feed your food. Is that a beautiful thing? Do we agree it's a nice thing?
Yes.
Have you fulfilled the mitzvah of hospitality?
No.
No?
No?
No. Bring him into your house.
Why? Why?
Because it's personal space, and that's the ultimate sacrifice to bring somebody in your.
Okay, so now we're getting somewhere.
I'm cheating because I remember this.
Oh, okay. We talked about
I don't
this?
want to be honest.
All right,
about
okay.
it.
Oh, you did. Okay, very good.
All right, okay.
So we did talk about this. I don't remember exactly, but I want to add a piece to that, and that is, you're absolutely right. That the biggest curse. Every person needs a makom. Every person needs a place that nurtures them, that they feel anchored in. Right? The ultimate curse is what God told Cain, Nov and Nod, you're going to be a wanderer the rest of life. You have no makom, you have no place. That's the ultimate curse. Every person needs a place. And the truth is that the opportunity to host somebody is more than just doing an act of kindness. Because the person is traveling, And if you put him in a hotel, he might feel rested, but he doesn't feel he has a place. Meaning, even in the expression, when hospitality, make yourself at home, right? What you're doing is you're giving the person a sense of home. That's a whole lot different than even the most luxurious hotel where you're living out of that suitcase and you're not feeling at home. But the feeling of being home and anchored, that makom, that place is huge in a person's kind of mental health and emotional health. But here's the thing, everyone has their own space. And when you open up your space and let somebody else in your space, that's not so easy, right? I'm opening my space and I'm saying my space is now your space. That's hard. To give my space up and give it to your space. Avram was not being manipulative. It's not that he used hospitality as a means of getting you in the door. The hospitality itself was the kiruv. Why? When Abraham opened his space and you got to live in Abraham's space, that itself was the outreach. It wasn't that he was using that as a means to get to outreach. That wasn't the case. But it was more than that. It was if you got into Abraham's space, that itself was the outreach because you became affected by Abraham's makom. If Abraham's makom now becomes your makom, if Abraham's place becomes your place, that itself has an impact. So it wasn't he was kind of being deceptive and using it as a ruse to get you in the door. No, that was the outreach. The outreach was, I want you to feel my makom. I'm letting you into my makom. And when you're in Abraham's makom, it put you in a whole different place. Okay? So that's the actions of kindness and hospitality and visiting sick. Okay, I want to just move on a little
Can I
bit.
ask you a question?